What's up guys, and welcome to my advanced beginner method clock tutorial. This is a tutorial on how to solve a clock that goes over the beginner method plus a few advanced things you should know if you want to get your times from this, like my friend, down to this. First thing we're going to go over is notation. There's notation for each of the clock faces plus these 4 pins in the clock here as well. So we're going to go over the faces first. So starting with this is the U face, this is the R face, this is the D face, this is the L face, this is the C face for center, this is UL face, UR face, DR face, and DL face. And then when we flip, this is the U face, again, R, D, L, C, UL, UR, DR, DL. For the pins, this is the UR pin, this is the DR pin, this is the DL pin, and this is the UL pin. And then when we flip, this is the UR pin, this is the DR pin, this is the DL pin, and this is the UL pin. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how the clock moves. So you can push these pins in any order you like, and then there are 4 dials just like this attached to each of the corners that you spin. If you spin a dial around a pin that is up, all of the clocks around that pin will move. So you can see, since this pin is up and I'm spinning this dial, the 4 clocks around it move. If this pin was up and I spun this dial, the 4 clocks around it would move. Same thing with this pin and this dial, and this pin and this dial. Also, if you have multiple pins up and you spin a dial that is connected to one of those pins, all the clocks around the pins will move. So you can see, since this clock is connected to this pin, and I turn it, all 6 of the clocks around these pins will move. If I have 3 of them up and I turn any one of these 3 which are connected to these pins, all 8 of the clocks around them will move. And if I have all pins up, then all clocks will move. So now we're going to go over to the steps to solve a clock. So the first step that you're going to want to do is solve the middle clocks, or what we call the cross. So the U, R, D, L, and C clock. Face them all the same way and then point them to 12. Just like this. Next, we're going to flip over and do the same thing on the other side. So match the U, R, D, L, and C clocks together, just like this. Then we want to match this cross to all of the corners, just like this. And now we orient everything back to 12, and the clock is solved. Okay, and now we're going to go into the steps on how to do what I just did. So I'm going to be following a scramble that I will put up on the screen right now if you want to follow along. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about pin order. The pin order that I like to use to solve the cross is first the UR pin up, next the DR pin up, then the UL pin up, both U pins up, and then only the DR pin down. But the way we're going to solve the cross with that pin order is, starting with the UR pin up, you're going to match U to L. So we can see that this clock to match L needs to go up here. So we use the dial that is connected to this pin, this dial, because if we turn any of the other ones, the U clock won't turn. So we use this dial that is connected to this pin and move it up to match this. Next, putting the UR pin down and the DR pin up, we're going to want to match the C clock to the U and L clock. So we can see that this clock also needs to go over here. So again, using the dial that is connected to the pin, this dial down here, we're going to move that C clock to match these. So next, putting the DR pin down and the UL pin up, we're going to want to match the U, L, and C clock to the R clock. So you can see that they just need to go up to 12. So using the dial that is connected to this pin, which will move these four, we can match these three to R, like this. Now, putting the UR pin up, so now both of the U pins are up, we're going to want to match these four clocks, so U, R, C, and L, to D. So you can use either of these two dials since they're connected to the pins. I like to use the right dial since I'm right-handed. You can use the left dial if you're left-handed if you want. Just like this. And now putting the DL pin up, so all 8 of these clocks will turn. We really only care about these 5 right now, but this pin up just makes sure that all of these clocks will turn. We orient them back to 12, which are these little red lines here. So now we flip over. We flip over this way, or what is called an X2 flip, not a Y2 flip, which is side to side. The X2 flip is faster, plus we know when we oriented these back to 12, we had these 3 pins up. So now when we flip, those 3 pins are down, and now the UR pin up, the UR pin is up, which is the one that we like to start a pin order with. Okay, so now we do the same thing we did on the other side. First, we'd have the UR pin up to match U with L. In this case, we can see that they are already matched, but let's say they were like this. Then you would, using the dial that is connected to the pin that is up, match them together. Next, again, put the UR pin down and the DR pin up, and we're going to match the center clock with U and L using the dial that is connected to the pin, like this. Now we can see that these 3 are matched. Now, putting the DR pin down and the UL pin up, we match these 3 clocks, the U, C, and L, to R, using this dial, because it is the one connected to this pin. The last step would be putting the UR pin up, so both U pins are up, and matching these 4 clocks with the D clock, turning one of these dials, turning one of these 2 dials. We can see that they are already matched, but let's say, for instance, they were in a position like this. We would, again, use one of these 2 dials and match them to the D clock. Before we orient the center to 12, we want to match these 5 clocks with all of these corners one by one. As we can see right now, the clocks are already at 12. That was just because the D clock was at 12. But let's say, for instance, they were in this position. So the pin order I like for corners is to first solve these 5 here with this corner by putting the pin that is adjacent to that corner down and turning any of these 3 dials, which will turn all 8 of these, but we only care about matching the 5 in the middle to this corner. So again, I like to use the top right dial because I'm right-handed, but you can use any of these 3 dials and you would match them to the corner like this. And so now we can see that these 5 in the middle are matched to this corner. Next, I like to put the DR pin up and put the DL pin down and do the same thing we just did to match these 5 to this corner, but now we match these 6, since we matched the cross to this corner, turning any one of these 3 dials, turning any of the dials that is not adjacent to this pin or this corner, which is down. So I like to use the top right dial again. We would match them like this. Next, I like to put the DL pin up and the UL pin down and do the same thing we did with these 2 corners, but now match these 7 to this corner. So same thing we've done for the last 2, turn any dial that's not the dial adjacent to this pin or the dial connected to this corner, which is this one. So turn any of these 3 dials to match them to this corner. Now we can see our last corner was skipped, but if we had something like this, we have all 8 of these matching. We matched all 8 of these. And so we would do the same thing we had done for this corner, and this corner to the corner one final time. Now we can see, since this dial that we used to match the other 3 corners is adjacent to this pin, we can't turn it because only the corner would turn. We would have to turn one of these 3 dials. I like to use the top left one on this last corner to match all 8 of these finally to this. Just like that. And now we can see that all of the clocks are already pointing to 12, but if we matched all the corners and they weren't, then we would just move them back to 12. And now we can see that our clock is solved on this face, and if we flip it over, it is solved on the other face. And that is how to solve a clock. Now we're going to move on to some of the more advanced things I like to do when I learn this method to drop my times even further. So what I do is I look at all of the 4 outside cross clocks on both sides and see which ones are closest together, and if the center clock is also close to those 2. So what I do is I count the distance between, so let's say we're holding it this orientation, I count the distance between what would be the U clock and the L clock. So in this case, it would be, this clock needs to go here, so it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I would also count the distance from the C clock to the U clock. So we see that this needs to go down here, so it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we add this together and we get 8, which is a pretty big number. So I would probably not choose those. And if we look at this side, we can also see that the center and the U clock are close together, but also the U clock isn't very close to the L clock. So the one I would probably choose for this solve, this being my U clock, this being my L clock, because we can see the distance between these is only 1, and the distance between the C clock and the U clock is only 3. So that's only 4 moves that I would have to make for the first 2 steps to solve these 3 clocks. So after solving those, I would continue with the solve as normal. And once I got here, I'd have to remember where my 12 is, because it's not on the top now, it's on the bottom. And then I'd have to orient those clocks. I'd have to orient the clocks to 12, wherever 12 is on the solve. And then we flip and continue the solve normally and finish. Again, remembering that now 12 on this side is not on the bottom, it's on the top. Now, I also mentioned a little bit before about skipping steps. If you come to a step and the clocks are already in the same position or the clocks are already matching, there is nothing you need to do for that step. You can move directly on to the next one. Okay, and now I'm going to do some example solves, slow them down a little bit, and show the method in action in my solves. Alright guys, thanks for watching my tutorial. This is the first video on my channel. Hopefully videos will be coming this summer every Friday at noon Eastern. And then when school starts, we'll see how much time I have to keep making videos. But I promise for the rest of the summer, videos every Friday, again at noon Eastern. Alright, thanks guys. Bye.